all of the Western countries that were in Afghanistan, that they invested, including the US, they invested billions, right? And billions actually were wasted for nothing, either for corruption, either for they brought their own contractors. Let's say the US, because US was the biggest investor and aid provider. They brought their money, they brought their own companies. Their companies worked in Afghanistan, took their own money, went back to the US. That's one way.
I cannot really imagine a worse place on earth to live as a woman than Afghanistan. And I also want to know your insight as a person who analyzes the situation on the ground. What, in your opinion, are the most severe restrictions right now that women are facing? The ban on education and basically ban on working almost anywhere?
I would put it in a different way. I would say being a woman is a crime in Afghanistan.
Welcome back to Fractured. We covered the topic of Afghans only 2 weeks ago. And specifically, we discussed the situation of Afghan refugees who are waiting in a line to get to the United States because they supported US troops while they were inside Afghanistan. And we, of course, highly recommend this episode with Afghan Evac. And today, because the situation on the ground is so dire and because so many people still try to flee, we decided to go inside Afghanistan and discuss a little bit more of the situation on the ground to help people understand the motivation behind those attempts to flee. And to discuss this situation with me today is our guest. And I've been taught how to correctly pronounce your name by our Afghan team members. I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher it. So, please bear with me and forgive me. Qais Alamdar, not perfect, but still.
It's perfect. It's perfect.
A researcher, analyst, and the founder of Intelfocus. And thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us today. And to start, I would like to ask you a little bit about the picture on the ground when it comes to the humanitarian situation. According to all the data we have, and I'm quoting OCHA right now in 2025, almost half of the country, 22.9 million people, are in dire need of humanitarian aid. Can you please tell us what does it really mean? What is really needed? What is missing? And is any help reaching people?
Thank you for having me. So let me make it very clear. When we talk about humanitarian crisis, it's not the crisis of lack of food or lack of having access to fruits, grains, oil, or anything that makes you live the life you want as a human being. What's different is that people don't have the money to buy it, right? So that makes it the crisis, because Afghanistan in itself is quite rich in many areas when it comes to agriculture and all of that. But the problem is that there is no proper economy in place. Very few people are able to survive, and those who are surviving, of course, either they have the cash or they have the job or somehow they have the means to survive. But when we talk about crisis, humanitarian crisis, okay, there are different layers, right? One, we have the economy part. The other is about the job market, and the other is also about the rights in human rights situation. So all combined together creates this crisis that is still going on. I have friends traveling to Afghanistan to help out through their organizations to people who are in dire need of shelter, food, education, right? What they say when they come back, that the situation is even worse than before the Taliban, because of course the issue is obvious. When the Taliban came, they're also under sanctions. They cannot do a lot of economic activities. But what we see at the moment, I'm coming back to my main point, is that there is no shortage of food. There's shortage of work. There's shortage of salary. So if people don't have that, how would you be able to survive? And let me make it clear: it's not a welfare state. Okay, if you don't have a job, the government would pay you, or if there is a food bank there, it doesn't exist. The only food bank that exists is through these organizations that are providing food, or individuals collecting donations and sending them over to local organization to distribute that. So that's what's going on at the moment.
Mhm. So you mentioned some of your friends going inside and trying to bring some help. I am actually curious what is possible in terms of humanitarian aid. Many organizations are not allowed to work inside Afghanistan. Also, the ones who were there, the big ones, were forced, for example, to lay off all women. So is the help actually reaching people, reaching everybody, maybe just some of them?
Well, the thing about, I mean, there are so many people that are still cannot be reached, logistically speaking, not just based on restrictions, right? Charities usually have access to the country. um, I've seen people like Afghan American charities, those who are based in Europe. uh, they do these donations and providing aid, although minimum, but it reaches certain people. But if we're talking about, okay, whether everyone can get the aid, it's impossible. Okay, even if there are billions of aid, right? Because if you provide food for people for a week, for millions of people, it costs way more than you can imagine, right? But what's needed are infrastructure, job security, education, right? And a bit of having human rights in that country, so that people at least can find creative ways of employment. Let me give you another example, which just recently happened. There were like four friends. They dressed like the Shelby, Thomas Shelby, that British TV series, right? They got arrested by the Taliban. Why? Well, Taliban claimed they were
Mm-hmm.
wearing Western clothes and it's un-Islamic. Okay, of course it's that's problematic in a way. There is no Islamic or un-Islamic clothing when it comes to normal clothes. What they mean is that, okay, you don't look like us, so you're just spreading something else, and that's why we're gonna arrest you. So imagine we live in a technological world. If they, just a group of friends, they could just become a, okay, they become a trend, they create something, online content, maybe fun, maybe style, maybe something which is not political at all, not at all. And at least through social media platforms, they are able to earn a few pennies, right? Taliban are taking that from them. That's one thing. We did. I actually did a report on how the Taliban are cracking down on social media um, influencers, or people, just young people on TikToks who are like doing funny things, going live, maybe dancing, maybe singing, maybe making jokes and stuff like that. Taliban started cracking down on all of them, arrested them. Of course, didn't put them in prison for so long, but threatened them that if you continue to do this, we then will properly arrest you, right? So of course, it's a total control. It's fear. They cannot do anything. So the only way you can live is either you work for the Taliban, or you have your own business, something that is just about construction, maybe something that doesn't touch all these different aspects in a society. So it's very hard to find a solution for that. I don't think it's a possibility. On the propaganda side of the Taliban, they show a lot of infrastructure being built. This is a very common tactic of all authoritarian countries. Let's say North Korea, let's say Turkmenistan, let's say a lot of other countries. What they focus on is on the external part of their country, by showing, okay, how beautiful it is. Look, we asphalted this road, how clean it is. We have these parks, we have these monuments, we have built these shrines and these shrines. But if you look deep down, it's full of cracks in terms of people are, they don't have jobs, they have nothing. But because to show, okay, that they're governing, that they are implementing all these projects, it's all of show. And I believe this is a huge problem for a lot of people when they're consuming information about Afghanistan, because when propaganda is mixed with all of these aspects, it kind of distorts the reality of what's really happening in that country.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Taliban do claim that, okay, it's nothing's happening, it's secure. Of course, it's secure. There is some sense of security because they no longer are in the insurgency part. They're no longer carrying attacks that they used to. But on when it comes to the security, when it comes to life security, when it comes to economic security, it doesn't exist. Every day, people trying to find a way to get out of the country. Why? It's no longer. It's maybe a part of it is economic as well, but also it's the future it's the prospect of whether they can have a life within the next few years or not. That's the
Mm-hmm.
issue. It's not an easy situation to describe. That's how I can put it for you.
Yeah. Kais, I was wondering if you can either confirm or deny this information, because I found it only in two articles and they were basically quoting each other, so I wasn't able to really verify it. But the authors claim that the situation is so dire right now in Afghanistan that many people find some new strategies to cope with it. For example, the child labor is growing a lot. The early child marriage is skyrocketing. That many people go into debts right now just to feed themselves. I was wondering if you, from your expertise, knowing the situation on the ground, know something about those issues.
Well, these two issues are not new. It exists in Afghanistan even before the Taliban's takeover, right? Child labor was the biggest part of the economy. In a way, people send their children the moment they start walking to either go work in a smith shop, or collect trash, and then, or maybe some pieces of different metals and sell them. um, those things already existed. So because the country overall is very poor and didn't have much of that infrastructure in it, but it was reliant on international aid or some sort of support, or there were ways that people at least could still find survival to survive. That's one thing to remember. Of course, after the Taliban's takeover, that has skyrocketed. When it comes to child marriages, it existed even before. It existed for centuries. uh, I'm not saying that this was normal. This wasn't normal. This isn't normal, and this will never be a normal thing. The reason why it happens now has different layers to it as well. One layer is that, of course, if you have a daughter who's young, from an economic perspective, they're kind of getting rid of that one family member. So there's one person eating at home, right? So that's one thing. The second is, okay, so if you're getting rid of one person, is that okay? Now, no, I'm not responsible for that. That's what's happening in many families. But on the other hand, if we see a lot of young marriages happening, but generally not just the child marriages, but also girls are marrying very young, the moment they're 18, 19, or 20, especially with people who are outside of Afghanistan, or with men who are outside Afghanistan. Why? So that they can leave the country. There are multifaceted layers into that. But of course, the reports, I'm not exactly sure which report that was, but it definitely has increased. And I would like to add that people were even started selling their body organs to survive, right? This is, although not widespread, to emphasize on that, not widespread, but there were cases of that. At the same time, there was many disinformation around that topic too. For instance, in one of my previous jobs, we were verifying a video that was circulating online showing allegedly a market where there are children and there are people and that, okay, they're selling their children. So it looked more like that, and the claim circulated. So we simply did a reverse image search and we tried to find the original video. When was it posted? How it was posted? It was, I think, Baghlan province in Afghanistan. It was just a vaccination that their children were brought to be vaccinated, right? But that was used to spread the claim, okay, they are being sold. But at the same time, the claim also, there is a reason why the claim is spreading, right? Maybe something is happening, so but people don't have a video, maybe they don't have a photo of it, so they just randomly find something to spread that. So that's why it's quite important to distinguish that, because a lot of reports don't just rely on videos or photos that are online. It's based on, of course, they have seen it or they have heard it or they have collected surveys and done research on that. And this again, this is not something new, but of course, after the Taliban's takeover, it has increased exponentially. Even I can add on the online hate speech part for you, the towards women generally, women who are active in society politically. Both doesn't matter whether they agree with each other or not from different political spectrums, but after the Taliban's takeover, politically active women of Afghanistan, they have received over 200% more hate compared to before the Taliban. So that also says something, right? So it's just, too many stuff that changed in the country. It wasn't just that, okay, government changes, but also mindset changes, like a whole hatred towards women, hatred towards human rights, and the country is spiraling. The only way that it's holding itself is through fear, because people are also afraid. They have nothing to eat, they have no job, no prospect, and that's why. So if you have an empty stomach,
Yeah.
how would you do a revolution if you don't have even the food to survive a day, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. And Case, I'm actually very curious. You mentioned a little bit the situation of activist journalists. Do we actually know, we as a larger society, what is happening specifically in Afghanistan? Meaning, independent journalism basically doesn't exist. Are there any larger reports? How do you see, for example, the big broadcasters like BBC, CNN? Do they get credible information from inside? And if so, how do they really operate?
That's a good question. When it comes to media, local Afghan channels, first they all disappeared as being impartial, because that's a question everyone like complaining the moment an international broadcaster says something that is not accurate. It draws a lot of course, criticism. But in Afghanistan, there were two folds. So one, a lot of them collapsed. A lot of local media channels collapsed because of course, Taliban's takeover. Some of these channels were related to, let's say, some political parties, some groups who fled the country. Of course, the funding frozen. Some of them also were receiving funding from other international organizations that they were operating. That has also got frozen. And there were other channels or newsrooms that they were operating based on sponsorships. Let's say they were businesses that they were running their ads on their channels, right? So that was their means of financing their activities. That also has decreased significantly, so they had to close. And then there was this element of, okay, what type of information you can share. Entertainment channels, they all closed down. And then you have these political shows or channels that are still operating, but they resorted into two things. First, a lot of the journalists, when they were arrested by the Taliban, were because they expressed an opinion that Taliban disagreed with, or they interviewed a person that the Taliban didn't want to be interviewed, or they covered a protest that they shouldn't have. Of course, they should have, but based on the Taliban's views, they shouldn't have. So that's how it was. And then when it comes to independent journalists, a lot of them resorted to self censorship for safety reasons. Self censorship meaning, okay, I won't say this online anymore. I won't write anything. I won't publish anything, or I will not publish about this topic anymore. I won't cover women's rights or human rights topic or female education. Even the term education, right, is very problematic if you're using it inside Afghanistan. A lot of even experts who may have showed support for the Taliban, but then they said, okay, yeah, we want the Taliban to open the schools. This is also harming them and this and that. They got arrested. Why? Because they shouldn't have talked about that things that the Taliban say, okay, it's our policy, no schools. Nobody should talk about it. Even it's not just about being open. It's just the opinion, expressing opinions. So self-expression doesn't exist. The ones that are operating, they are under strict Taliban guidelines and control. In a way, I would say it's now like some of the channels turned into propaganda channels. They were the champions of Afghan media, and even in the region where Afghanistan is. Afghanistan had one of the free medias when it comes to Pakistan, Iran, or Central Asian countries, or China. Afghanistan's media was the most free in the region for over 20 years. And I think that was one of the reasons also, like, people, it suddenly just turned like upside down from how it was. So yeah, some journalists were killed, some journalists were kidnapped. A lot of them, they just left the country, of course, for obvious reasons. But yeah, independent journalism doesn't exist in the country. And your question about how BBC or other news channels are gathering their information, of course, when they go, they first have a permission from the Taliban to even enter the country. And then they cover topics. When it comes to Taliban, they don't cover topics that are too sensitive for the Taliban, right? They go covering humanitarian crisis, they go cover certain major incidents that are happening, right? But on day-to-day basis, what the Taliban doing, criticizing them or challenging them, there were some journalists who were later barred by the Taliban, that they are no longer allowed to enter Afghanistan, right? But mainly a lot of these information come through sources inside Afghanistan who are anonymously reporting. Still, they are independent journalists, but they're using anonymous channels, anonymous sources to report. And a large chunk of it comes from social media. But of course, social media is filled with all these fake news, and it's hard to know what's real. And these channels have a methodology of verifying it, right? Okay. For instance, you have a claim, you have a picture, you do a reverse image search to see whether that picture was used somewhere else, whether that's the same location, you do the geolocation, and then you cross check it, and then of course then you report it until you're sure that it's fact checked and correct. And this is also part of my work. I used to do a lot of fact checkings when it comes to Afghanistan, all of these issues. So yeah.
I want to move to a topic that is very close to me and everybody in our organization, because we provide at this moment online classes for women inside Afghanistan. It's video voices, storytelling classes. And when we first started, almost until now, all the cameras are off, during the classes. All the women are still a bit afraid that maybe somebody will see them and report further that they are educating themselves, even though the requirement for the course is to have the support of the family, because otherwise it would be extremely difficult and challenging and dangerous for them, right? We had the first woman, like turning on her camera only a week ago, when she finally started also trusting us that it's not going to go anywhere farther, that the materials are just for everybody to learn and be creative and develop skills, right? But at this moment, because we are in this close contact with Afghan women, I cannot really imagine a worse place on earth to live as a woman than Afghanistan. And I also want to know your insight as a person who analyzes the situation on the ground. What, in your opinion, are the most severe restrictions right now that women are facing? The ban on education and basically ban on working almost anywhere?
I would put it in a different way. I would say being a woman is a crime in Afghanistan in itself. Because if we look closely from the 2021 when the Taliban took over happened until now, everything Taliban did was focused on women, how to curtail their rights. Okay, ban education, tell them cover their face. Oh, wear masks if you're not covering complete with scarf. Beat them. Don't allow them to go outside by themselves. Even, I mean, this is honestly it hurts, but I also see it in how crazy it gets because there were a lot of organizations, foundations, universities announced okay they're providing scholarships, right? Full scholarships for female students from Afghanistan to come study abroad, okay? And then Taliban stopped them at the airport. Where is your brother? Where is your father? You're not allowed to travel alone, right? So that's one, imprisoned in that way. And then of course, a lot of scholarships need a level of foreign language literacy, like English. No, so a lot of English courses were also stopped for girls. It wasn't just the schools, also courses to go and learn English so that they can at least go outside of the country and get that education. Right, that has to stop. And then that's on the level of education, just a society. When it comes to like internal rights, having your own rights, your own say. If a woman faces domestic violence, where should she go now? The course, everything say, oh well, your husband is your basically protector, owner, like that's your husband knows best. So it always the decision, everything is like towards men. If something happens, it's the woman's fault. If anything, so all of the restrictions that are on women of Afghanistan are severe. I mean, just taking away their future. That's the biggest punishment you can give someone, right? At a time when your brain is developing, you're full of energy, you're young, you're ambitious, you want to achieve something, and then you're not even allowed to go outside to read, to learn something that actually would help you, that actually would help the Taliban themselves. You see how crazy it gets. If if they were smart enough, they would allow women to even support them in their own regime. But no. On the other hand, it also has contributed to the crisis we have at the moment. A lot of families, of course, Afghanistan has been in conflict for so many years, from the late 70s until, I mean, even now, like that, still like killings, assassinations, kidnapping, all those stuff happening. But of course, we don't have active war at the moment. But until 2021, when we had them, a lot of families, they lost the male members of their families. So women are the main responsible or the main breadwinners of their families. They're not allowed to go even to work. So taking away children's and their future, I think I would say in that case is a severe restriction you can have, because if we look at the emancipation process of this slavery in America and in the United Kingdom, right? By emancipation, meaning that they themselves revolted, right? So if you let them educate themselves, if you let them empower themselves, of course, education leads to empowerment, and empowerment leads to emancipation. You start questioning, your brain is activated. You're no longer getting brainwashed easily, right? So they know that. That's why they don't allow women to even get that education, so that their brain develop that much. It's that's why it's multifaceted in that way. So if you stop that first door for people to get emancipated, you will never have an educated and bright society. And that's easy to rule over. Even if they're dying of hunger, it's easy to rule them because they're uneducated. The only thing they want is to live. And by living is maybe food. So they don't have any future at the moment, unfortunately.
When I think about the situation of women in Afghanistan, it seems like it will be so hard for the next generation that will be completely cut from education. But mentally, I think for the women who were educated and raised during the time when the American troops were in Afghanistan, that's probably the hardest situation because they were taught that they have a right, equal rights basically to men, that they were encouraged to educate themselves, to reach for whatever their dream was. Many organizations, international organizations, were providing extra spots in their hiring hierarchy just for women to make sure that the equality process is continuing. And now basically everything is taken away from them, right? And there is this very strong saying by I think UNHCR or UN Women, I don't remember right now, saying that basically what is happening in Afghanistan for women right now is gender apartheid. And I actually agree with it because everything that we are hearing from those girls we're teaching is a voice of desperation, to be honest. Because from being active, I have one girl who was a blogger, and now she's afraid to leave the house. She's not allowed basically without a male companion. But, imagine being a blogger, so basically being a very active person, and now a man in your family, even like your young brother or your father or your husband, will be telling you everything what you need to know and how you should behave. And one more thing that really strikes me in this situation is also the situation with burqas. So apparently at the beginning when it was introduced, some women went out and protested and were very vocal about it, that they do not wish to be covered from head to toe. And then this ban that was introduced was enforced on men, basically. So it was men's responsibility to keep their women covered, both men in the families, but also employers. If they were employing women at the beginning when it was still allowed, they were getting fines for those women not being dressed appropriately.
Yeah, in the beginning, um, when we talk about, okay, American troops were there, they weren't there to just make Afghan women free. That's it was there was a system, there was a government, it was people themselves trying to seek what's their right, their natural right to education and to be a free human being. Was full of challenges even before the Taliban's takeover. A lot of families were not allowing their girls to even go to university after finishing high school. And they were fighting. They were fighting at the family level, right, to get that permission and to rebel against those restrictions from societal perspective. But they weren't banned by the government, right? That's the distinction I want to make. So they were allowed to go seek, become doctor, become engineer, become teacher, be an artist, be a musician. Although still being a musician was very challenging, very taboo in Afghan society, but still they were places that they could learn, right? Um, what changed after that was, of course, their future was taken completely away. Um, but a lot of conversation shows that, okay, during the past 20 years of before the Taliban's takeover, everything was so beautiful, so perfect. It wasn't perfect. It was bad, I would say. But now it's become unimaginably worse. So that's the difference, I would say. Bad in a sense that still there was so many reports of domestic violence that was happening. Misogyny was, of course, it's part of that society. A lot of men are misogynistic. I want to make it clear it's not just the Taliban, the country the women are facing that situation. Also, it's the problem of men in that country. A lot of men in Afghanistan have this mindset of being a Talib towards women, but maybe they're okay with other stuff. So, but quite well, in a lot of families, in a lot of places, okay, women could do a lot of things themselves, or they would fight men, let's say, in terms of their rights, or they could at least go to the court, or there was some glimpse of hope for them always. There was some small window of opportunity that they could achieve something, but that small window was taken away from them too, right? Um, I'm glad you mentioned about the gender apartheid in Afghanistan. So there is a campaign actually going on for a few years now that they want to recognize the gender apartheid. The issue is the term apartheid is recognized internationally and by the UN mechanisms, but the term gender apartheid is new. Although the UN refers to the current situation of women in Afghanistan as gender persecution, uh, but all the conditions of being apartheid in terms of gender is met. However, it is still there is a long way for it to be recognized. If it is recognized as gender apartheid, of course there will be way more pressure on the Taliban, and it's still in process. It's still a process. However, right now, based on like the United Nations and especially the special rapporteur on Afghanistan from the United Nations, he and his reports and everything refers to the current situation as gender persecution, persecution based on gender, which is also part of the Human Rights Convention that um, you you should not be persecuted based on your gender, political views, or self-expression, right? And that's what's happening in Afghanistan. All of the international human rights um, laws that talks about all these stuff that okay, a human being is free for self-expression, self-identification, based on they shouldn't be persecuted or discriminated against based on their religion, based on their tribe, ethnicity, or however, right? But that's happening at the moment, and that's why the International Criminal Court they opened a case against the Taliban supreme leader and Taliban's chief justice, and now there's an arrest warrant for both of them, and that's happening. Gender apartheid still hasn't been recognized, but efforts are being made constantly for the United Nations for it to recognize it as a crime against humanity. Yeah.
Um, you started talking about the pressure on the Taliban government, and the pressure was severe at the very beginning when they took over power, sanctions, travel bans, etc. And now they seem to be, slowly. I don't want to say that they do not exist anymore, but Western governments do not look so harshly at the Taliban. We recently have the talks in Germany with the Taliban about opening a consulate, Taliban consulate in Germany, and Germany wants the Taliban to take some of the refugees back, predominantly the ones who have criminal past. In your opinion, so my first thing would be, would those sanctions work? So did they really work, or did they make the humanitarian situation of average Afghan person worse? And the second situation is, how do you see those talks and collaborations with the Afghan government right now? Should this be happening, or should there be a general ban on the cooperation with them?
When it comes to sanctions, mostly it didn't work, and it doesn't work either, because when we see the United Nations Security Council issued sanctions on key Taliban ministers, they still, of course, they didn't travel, but when they wanted to travel, they got permission to travel. So what kind of sanction is that? Sanction is that, okay, it's not based on permission. Okay, you're sanctioned for now, but then when you wanted to travel, we'll pause that sanction so you can travel. First, it was for Saudi Arabia. The excuse was, okay, they want to go and do the pilgrimage, or Hajj, they call it. And then also for different countries. And recently, Taliban's foreign minister traveled to India. And India considers itself a democracy, right? So that, it's quite complicated to describe it in this brief conversation. But of course, a lot of these countries in neighboring Afghanistan, the whole region, it's Taliban's existence is just not about, okay, they're there to oppress women, or to curtail human rights, right? There are broader implications. It's about geopolitical influence. It's about economy. It's about trade. It's about terrorism in the region, because that it's not just the Taliban, but also so many different groups that are active, including the ISKP, the Islamic State Khorasan province. Um, so even the United States CIA has been in touch with the Taliban even after the Taliban's takeover. They've been meeting secretly in Doha. And Russia rushed to recognize the Taliban in being the first government to officially recognize the Taliban. But a lot of other countries also recognize the Taliban, however, kind of de facto recognition, including the Gulf countries, India, Pakistan, Iran, most Central Asian countries, except Tajikistan, which is a unique case. And the recent discussion about around immigration in the country, from deporting people back from European countries. Germany allowed one diplomat of the Taliban to be factual here. It's not just like a bunch of Taliban came, just one diplomat, so that he can facilitate or take permission. And that was done by a deal, because the Taliban are always dealing, but they came to power with a deal, so they're dealing with European countries. They say, "Oh, we're happy, bring all these deportees to us. We're welcoming them, but give us the embassy, give us the consulate." That's they tried it a couple of times with Germany, even with the previous German government, which was the center-left government, the SPD, the Greens, and the Free Democrats. So what was interesting, they were losing in the polls. They were losing, and they tried to deport people to Afghanistan, and they made it. Like they flew one chartered flight directly to Afghanistan, but that was mediated through Qatar. And then, of course, it's very costly for them. And I think somehow they came to a conclusion that they don't no longer want to negotiate through Qatar with the Taliban. So Qatar was like always like, okay, Germany was talking to Qatar, Qatar was talking to the Taliban, and vice versa. And Germany's new government said, okay, we're going to talk to them directly. And that direct talks actually enabled the Taliban's presence in Germany, which is quite problematic for when it comes to the European and German values. When it comes to German constitution itself, it's kind of in contradiction with that. Um, a lot of countries have de facto relations with the Taliban. It continues to engage on various levels, but they also maintain quite of a distance from them. When it comes to human rights, unfortunately, it's not on the priority list of many Western countries, and it's understandable as well from a global perspective. They're all dealing with their own internal issues, with Russian invasion of Ukraine. All of resources are invested on that, and then focuses on so many domestic issues when it comes to political aspects. They're all afraid of, okay, the right-wing political parties are rising in Europe, a lot of protests, instability happening, recession is in place. So human rights is, I think, it's not a priority now. To be fairly frank on that, unfortunately.
What do you think could be like one, two, or three like immediate actions that Western governments could take to improve the situation of Afghan people?
Well, there's so many ways they could do. They could have done even before. This is a huge criticism I have of all of the Western countries that were in Afghanistan, that they invested, including the US. They invested billions, right? And billions actually were wasted for nothing, either for corruption, either for they brought their own contractors. Let's say the US, because US was the biggest investor and aid provider. They brought their money, they brought their own companies. Their companies worked in Afghanistan, took their own money, went back to the US. That's one way. Of course, the Afghan government was also corrupt immensely. And what could have happened, we have a very famous saying, right? Teach them how to fish, but don't give them the fish. But they did the opposite. They were giving the fish, but not teaching them how to fish. When it, whatever we've done, like I grew up in Afghanistan. I wasn't what I did. There wasn't a foreigner telling me what to do. I was like struggling every day with my cycle. I was traveling for 1 hour to just get to a course, a language course to learn English and go to school, go to that. My family was economically struggling, right? It wasn't the foreigners that were doing. We were trying our best to build our country as individuals, right? So they did not do a lot in terms of infrastructure. What they invested was mainly on, okay, we're going to spend this money, we dedicated this money, but they did not track it. Now they're like CIGAR. They were posting a lot of reports examining their funding of different sectors in Afghanistan, and they're always talking about how much money they spend on things that they shouldn't have, or they should have a mechanism to monitor that spending. Yeah, so currently the only thing I can say is that for them to keep supporting the people and education, and be serious when it comes to sanctions. They're not serious in being extremely diplomatic in saying it. And if they want to sanction the Taliban, sanction them directly and fairly, and put pressure on the countries that are supporting the Taliban as well, which is Russia and Europe. West and Russia are currently fighting. So that's another topic, I guess.
Yeah. Guys, I want to thank you so much for this honest and in-depth conversation about the situation in Afghanistan. We talked from so many perspectives, and I have a feeling we could be talking for days to go deep, even deeper into the situation. So hope we will have a chance to do it again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And thank you very much for watching and listening. We are going to take a short Christmas holidays break, but we will be back in January, so make sure to check the next episode.